The fried chicken at Royal Farms keeps cooking itself after we close, the pressure fryers bubbling and hissing with no one operating them, filling the kitchen with the smell of meat that's been prepared by hands that haven't held a job in decades. I hear the timers going off at 3 a.m., the mechanical ding that signals another batch is ready. But when I check the fryers, they're empty except for oil that bubbles without heat and spatters without making any mess. The chicken that appears on the warming racks comes from recipes I've never seen, seasoned with spices that don't exist in our inventory, prepared by kitchen staff whose names are carved into the metal prep tables but don't appear on any payroll. Customers who order this phantom chicken always eat it with reverence, like they're tasting something sacred, something that feeds more than just their hunger. And when they finish, they always ask if they can speak to the cook. But there's never anyone back there except the sound of invisible hands, preparing the next batch. My name is Dante Washington, and 3 months ago I thought managing a Royal Farms on Eastern Avenue would be the worst thing that could happen to me after my discharge from the Army. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. I thought Baltimore would feel familiar since I grew up 20 minutes away in Dundalk. Thought the overnight shifts would give me time to think. Thought the steady paycheck would help me get back on my feet after the medical discharge left me with a gimpy leg and a head full of static. The store sits between a laundromat that never seems to have customers and a carry-out place called Eddie's that's been temporarily closed since I started working here. Patterson Park is 6 blocks north, where I used to take my little sister Keisha to feed the ducks when we were kids, before she moved to Atlanta for college and stopped returning my calls. The neighborhood changes personalities depending on the time of day. Working families buying groceries and gas during daylight hours. Different crowds after midnight, when the bars close and people need energy drinks and rolling papers. I took the job because Anthony Ricci, the district manager, promised me $42,000 a year in health insurance. He's got an office in Glen Burnie and drives a silver Altima that always smells like Old Bay and stress sweat. During my interview at a Dunkin' Donuts on Route 1, he kept checking his phone and telling me the store had turnover issues, but good management potential. He failed to mention that 5 store managers had quit in 18 months, or that the previous guy, someone named Tommy Kowalski, left behind a handwritten note taped inside the register drawer. The note had 7 lines of text, numbered like a grocery list, with instructions that sounded like the paranoid ramblings of someone who'd been working too many double shifts. I almost threw it away that first week, figuring Tommy had cracked under the pressure of dealing with late-night customers and corporate quotas. But then the chicken started cooking itself, and the note started making sense. Tommy's note was written on the back of a receipt from Fenwick Crab House, the ink smudged in places like his hands had been shaking. The paper felt soft from being folded and unfolded, read and reread by someone who'd been trying to make sense of what he was experiencing. Rule 1. Never acknowledge the kitchen sounds after 2 a.m. They're not coming from equipment malfunction. Rule 2. If customers ask for the special chicken, serve it without questions. Don't ask how they know about it. Rule 3. The woman in the navy coat will come in every Tuesday at 11:47 p.m. Give her a fountain drink and charge 50 cents. She pays with quarters from 1987. Rule 4. Don't go into the storage room if you hear humming. Wait until it stops. Rule 5. If the phone rings during overnight hours, answer with Royal Farms Baltimore 3 times before hanging up. Never ask who's calling. Rule 6. The delivery truck that comes before dawn isn't on the schedule. Accept whatever they bring. Rule 7. If you smell something burning that isn't food, lock the front door and wait in the office until sunrise. I read the list twice, then tucked it back into the register drawer. Tommy had written, "Follow these," in block letters at the bottom, underlined so hard the pen had torn through the paper. The handwriting looked like it belonged to someone who'd been stationed in Afghanistan. That mix of careful precision and barely contained panic I recognized from my own journal entries during my tour. My first week passed without incident. The store operated like any other Royal Farms in Maryland, coffee brewing constantly, roller grill hot dogs spinning under heat lamps, customers buying scratch-offs and energy drinks during the day shift. I worked 6 to 6, training with Maria Santos, a woman in her 50s who'd been running day shifts for 3 years. She taught me the register system, how to operate the fountain drink machine, and which customers to watch for shoplifting. "You're replacing Tommy Kowalski," she said while showing me how to cream the coffee urns. "Nice kid, but he got weird toward the end. Started talking about sounds in the kitchen, customers that didn't make sense. Management figured he was using something stronger than caffeine to stay awake." I asked what happened to him. "Quit via text message on a Tuesday morning. Anthony found the keys under the gas pump and a note saying he was moving back to Pennsylvania. Haven't heard from him since." Maria never mentioned anything about rules or strange customers. She left at 6 sharp every evening, gathering her purse and jacket while reminding me to keep the roller grill stocked and the coffee fresh. "Baltimore gets hungry after dark," she'd say, checking her phone for messages from her daughter in Towson. "Take care of them. They'll take care of you." The overnight crowds were different. Construction workers heading to early shifts, nurses finishing 12-hour shifts at Johns Hopkins, people who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else but stopping for gas and energy drinks. I learned their patterns quickly. Who paid with cash, who bought the same items every night, who loitered in the parking lot before coming inside. Tuesday night, 11:45, I was restocking the candy display when the front door chimed. A woman in a navy coat walked in, her footsteps echoing on the tile floor, with a rhythm that reminded me of rain on the tent roof. She approached the fountain drink machine, filled a large cup with Diet Coke, and placed 2 quarters on the counter. The coins looked different, older somehow, with a sheen that modern quarters don't have. When I picked them up, they felt warm like they'd been sitting in sunlight, though the woman's hands had looked pale and cold. 50 cents, I said, though large fountain drinks cost $1.69. She nodded and left without speaking. The door chimed again, and when I looked outside, the parking lot was empty, except for a Honda Accord that hadn't been there when she arrived. By the time I'd processed the transaction, both the car and woman were gone. I checked the quarters again. 1987, both of them, with Abraham Lincoln's profile sharper than on modern coins. I dropped them into the register and tried to forget about Tommy's note, but my hands kept finding their way back to the drawer where I had hidden it. Thursday brought the first kitchen sounds. 2:15 a.m., while I was mopping the customer area, I heard the pressure fryer activate, the deep rumble of oil heating, the mechanical click of the timer, the subtle hiss of steam. I checked the schedule Maria had left. The fryers were supposed to be cleaned and shut down by 10 p.m. every night. I walked toward the kitchen, thinking maybe I'd missed something during closing procedures, but stopped when I reached the swinging door. Through the circular window, I could see the fryers were dark, their pilot lights extinguished, but the sounds continued. Oil bubbling, metal expanding, the distinct clatter of chicken pieces being lowered into hot oil. Tommy's note felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. Never acknowledged the kitchen sounds after 2 a.m. I backed away from the door, finished mopping, and spent the rest of my shift pretending I couldn't hear the phantom kitchen operating behind me. By sunrise, the sounds had stopped. When Maria arrived for her shift, I asked if she'd ever noticed anything odd about the fryers. "Only that they make the best chicken in Baltimore," she said, checking the warming racks. "You keeping up with production? Customers expect Royal Farms chicken to be fresh." The warming racks held a dozen pieces of fried chicken, golden brown and steaming like they'd just come out of the fryer, but I hadn't cooked anything since yesterday evening. The chicken on the warming racks tasted different from anything I'd eaten before. During my lunch break, I grabbed a piece just to confirm what I already suspected. This wasn't the same recipe Royal Farms corporate had been using for 20 years. The seasoning blend had notes I couldn't identify, herbs that reminded me of my grandmother's kitchen in Dundalk, but with something deeper, more complex. Maria noticed me chewing thoughtfully. Good, right? That's why people drive from Fells Point just for our chicken. Some secret the kitchen staff knows. What kitchen staff? I asked. You and I are the only employees scheduled this week. She paused while restocking the cigarette display, her expression shifting slightly. Well, whoever's been handling the cooking does good work. Don't question success, Dante. Corporate's happy with our food sales numbers. The week continued with small confirmations that Tommy's rules weren't paranoid delusions. Wednesday night, a man in his 60s approached the counter and asked for the special chicken without looking at the menu board or pricing signs. He spoke like he'd been ordering the same thing for years, his voice carrying the flat vowels of East Baltimore mixed with something older, more formal. I handed him a 2-piece meal from the warming rack, charging him the standard price. He paid with a $20 bill that felt crisp despite looking worn around the edges, then sat at one of the plastic tables near the window. As he ate, he closed his eyes after each bite, like he was remembering something important. When he finished, he approached the counter again. "Could I speak to the cook?" he asked, the same reverent tone Tommy had described. "Kitchen's closed for the night," I said, following the rule about not asking questions. He nodded like this was the expected response, gathered his trash, and left. Through the window, I watched him cross Eastern Avenue toward Patterson Park, though visiting a city park after midnight seemed like an odd choice for a man his age. Thursday brought my first encounter with Rule 4. Around 1 a.m. while I was checking inventory in the back office, I heard someone humming in the storage room. The melody was unfamiliar but somehow comforting, like a lullaby played in a minor key. The humming had a quality that reminded me of my sister Keisha when she used to practice choir songs in her bedroom, but deeper, richer, like multiple voices harmonizing. I stood from my desk, ready to investigate who might be in the storage room after hours, when Tommy's note surfaced in my memory. "Don't go into the storage room if you hear humming. Wait until it stops." The humming continued for 23 minutes. I know because I kept checking the office clock, watching the digital display change while the melody drifted through the walls. The sound had layers, sometimes a single voice, sometimes multiple harmonies weaving together, occasionally joined by what sounded like instruments I couldn't identify. When silence finally returned, I waited another 10 minutes before entering the storage room to grab supplies for the coffee station. Everything looked normal. Cases of soda syrup, boxes of napkins, cleaning supplies arranged on metal shelving. But the air felt different, charged like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm, and the temperature was several degrees warmer than the rest of the building. Friday night's phone call came at 2:47 a.m. The old landline behind the counter rang with a harsh electronic tone that echoed through the empty store. I answered on the third ring. "Royal Farms, Baltimore," I said, following Rule 5. Silence. "Royal Farms, Baltimore." Still nothing, though I could hear something in the background. Distant conversation, maybe music, like a radio playing in another room. "Royal Farms, Baltimore." The line went dead. I hung up and tried to forget about it, but the call felt significant somehow, like I'd just completed some kind of transaction or agreement. Saturday brought a different kind of customer. A woman in her 30s walked in around 10 p.m., wearing scrubs from Union Memorial Hospital and looking like she'd been working double shifts for a week. She bought a large coffee, 2 energy drinks, and asked about the fried chicken. "Is it fresh?" she asked, examining the pieces in the warming rack. "Made tonight," I said, though I had no idea when or how. She ordered a 3-piece meal and sat near the window, eating slowly while reading something on her phone. Halfway through her meal, she paused and looked toward the kitchen. "Whoever's cooking back there really knows what they're doing," she said. "This tastes like my grandmother's recipe. She used to run a restaurant in Little Italy before the neighborhood changed." After she left, I found myself staring at the warming rack, trying to understand how chicken prepared by invisible hands could taste like customers' personal memories. The pieces looked ordinary: golden brown coating, proper seasoning distribution, the kind of fried chicken you'd expect from any Royal Farms location. But something about them seemed to connect with people on a level that went beyond simple hunger. Sunday night tested Rule 7 for the first time. Around 3 a.m., while restocking the roller grill, I caught a whiff of something burning. Not food, something chemical and acrid, like plastic melting or electrical wiring overheating. The smell grew stronger as I moved through the store, trying to locate the source. I checked the coffee makers, the grill, the fryers, even the bathroom for potential problems. Everything looked normal, but the burning smell intensified until it felt like breathing through fabric soaked in motor oil. My eyes started watering, and my throat felt scratchy. Tommy's note demanded I lock the front door and wait in the office until sunrise. I flipped the deadbolt, switched off the main lights, and retreated to the back office. The burning smell followed me, growing stronger despite the closed door. I spent the next 3 hours sitting at the desk, breathing through my shirt and watching the clock advance toward dawn. At 6 a.m. sharp, the smell vanished like someone had flipped a switch. Maria arrived for her shift to find me unlocking the front door, my eyes still red from whatever had been burning. "You feeling all right?" she asked, setting her purse behind the counter. "You look like you haven't slept." "Just tired," I said, gathering my keys and jacket. As I walked to my car, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. The dumpster behind the building, where we disposed of waste oil and food scraps, was smoking slightly. Not the normal steam from organic decay, but thin wisps of gray smoke that smelled exactly like the burning odor from the night before. I drove home to my apartment on Lombard Street, trying to convince myself that managing a gas station overnight was just another job, that the rules were coincidences or pranks left by a previous employee who'd been under too much stress. But the taste of that phantom chicken lingered in my mouth, seasoned with spices that didn't exist in our inventory, prepared by hands that belonged to cooks whose names were carved into prep tables but appeared on no payroll. And Tuesday was coming, which meant the woman in the navy coat would return at 11:47 p.m., carrying quarters from 1987 and expecting her 50-cent fountain drink. Tuesday arrived with the weight of expectation. I'd spent the day thinking about the woman in the navy coat, checking my watch repeatedly during the evening shift to track time until her predicted arrival. Maria noticed my distraction while we handled the dinner rush. Construction workers from the downtown stadium project grabbing energy drinks and sandwiches before heading home to Glen Burnie in Essex. "You're jumpy tonight," she observed, counting register receipts. "Something bothering you?" I considered telling her about Tommy's rules, about the phantom cooking, and the customers who asked for special chicken that wasn't on any menu. But Maria seemed genuinely unaware of the store's overnight peculiarities, and I didn't want to sound like someone who'd been working too many solo shifts. "Just getting used to the overnight schedule," I said. She finished her count and gathered her belongings. Try not to overthink things, don't they? Sometimes night shifts make people imagine patterns that aren't really there. This neighborhood's been the same for 30 years. Predictable customers, steady business, nothing too exciting. After she left, I spent the evening handling typical transactions. A nurse from Hopkins bought coffee and pain relievers. 3 teenagers pooled their money for gas and candy. An elderly man paid for scratch-offs with exact change, studying each ticket like he was reading tea leaves. Normal interactions that helped me feel grounded before whatever might happen at 11:47. The clock above the register showed 11:30 when I started getting nervous. I rearranged the cigarette display, wiped down counters that were already clean, and checked the fountain drink machine to ensure it was working properly. The anticipation felt like waiting for an important phone call or job interview, that mix of curiosity and dread that makes time crawl. 11:45. The parking lot was empty except for my Honda Civic and a delivery truck idling near the air pump. The driver appeared to be sleeping, his cap pulled down over his eyes. 11:46. I rechecked the register drawer, making sure I had enough quarters for change. My hands felt sweaty despite the store's air conditioning. 11:47. The front door chimed. She entered exactly as Tommy had predicted. Navy coat, pale hands, footsteps that echoed with unusual resonance. This time I paid closer attention to details he hadn't mentioned. Her coat looked military style, with brass buttons that caught the fluorescent light. Her hair was dark and pulled back in a style that reminded me of photographs from my grandmother's generation. She moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to following exact procedures. She approached the fountain drink machine and filled a large cup with Diet Coke, the carbonation hissing as she pressed the lever. When she placed the quarters on the counter, I noticed her fingernails were painted a deep red that looked almost black under the store's lighting. 50 cents, I said, though my voice came out rougher than intended. She nodded and handed me the coins. Up close, they looked even older than I'd remembered. 1987, but with a patina that suggested they'd been handled frequently over the decades. The metal felt warm, like she'd been holding them in her palm during a long walk. As she turned to leave, I found myself asking a question I hadn't planned. "Do you come here often?" She paused at the door, looking back with eyes that seemed too bright for the harsh fluorescent lighting. "Every Tuesday," she said, her voice carrying a slight accent I couldn't place. For 27 years. Then she was gone, the door chiming behind her. Through the window, I watched her walk toward Eastern Avenue, but the delivery truck that had been idling in the parking lot blocked my view. By the time the truck pulled away, she had vanished. I examined the quarters again, trying to understand why coins from 1987 would feel significant to someone who'd been visiting weekly for 27 years. The math suggested she'd started coming here around 1996 or 1997, nearly a decade after these particular quarters were minted. But the coins felt like they belonged to her somehow, like she'd been carrying them specifically for these weekly transactions. The kitchen sound started earlier that night, 1:45 a.m. instead of the usual post-2 o'clock timing. The pressure fryers activated with their familiar rumble, followed by the mechanical timer and the subtle hiss of oil heating. But tonight, I heard additional sounds, cabinet doors opening and closing, the clink of metal utensils, the soft thud of ingredients being placed on prep tables. I positioned myself near the customer seating area, far enough from the kitchen to avoid directly acknowledging the sounds while close enough to listen. The phantom cooking session seemed more elaborate than previous nights, lasting nearly an hour instead of the usual 20 or 30 minutes. I heard what sounded like multiple people working, voices murmuring instructions, footsteps moving between stations, the rhythmic chopping of vegetables. When the sounds finally stopped around 3 a.m., I waited 20 minutes before checking the warming racks. Instead of the usual dozen pieces of chicken, I found an entire spread. Chicken, potato wedges, mac and cheese, coleslaw, and biscuits. Everything looked professionally prepared, steaming like it had just finished cooking. The smell hit me differently this time. Instead of the familiar aroma of Royal Farms chicken, these dishes carried scents that reminded me of family gatherings. My aunt's Christmas dinners in Highlandtown, church potlucks at St. Casimir's, summer barbecues in Druid Hill Park. Each dish seemed designed to trigger specific memories, like someone had been cooking with nostalgia as an ingredient. Around 4 a.m., the delivery truck arrived. I heard it before I saw it, the rumble of a diesel engine pulling into the rear loading area, followed by the mechanical whine of hydraulic systems. But when I checked the delivery schedule, Maria had left. Nothing was listed for overnight hours. All vendor deliveries were supposed to happen between 6 a.m. and 4 p.m., when management could verify inventory and sign receiving documents. Through the back office window, I could see a white truck with no company markings backing up to the loading dock. The driver wore coveralls and a baseball cap, moving with the efficient motions of someone who'd made this delivery many times before. He unloaded cases of what looked like produce and dry goods, stacking them neatly on the dock before returning to his truck. I wanted to investigate, to ask for delivery receipts or verify the shipment contents. But Tommy's Rule 6 was specific: accept whatever they bring. The driver completed his delivery without attempting to contact anyone inside the store, climbing back into his truck and pulling away before I could approach the loading dock. When I checked the deliveries after sunrise, I found cases of spices I'd never seen before, herbs with handwritten labels in languages I couldn't read, seasoning blends that smelled like the phantom chicken from the warming racks. There were also containers of what appeared to be rendered cooking fat, dark and rich-looking, stored in unmarked metal cans. Maria arrived to find me examining the mysterious delivery in the storage room. "New supplier," she said, checking items against a clipboard. "Corporate's been testing different ingredient sources to improve food quality. Don't worry about the paperwork. Management handles vendor relationships directly." "But I didn't sign for any of this," I said. "The driver just left everything on the dock." "Some vendors have standing orders," she explained, though her tone suggested she was reciting policy rather than explaining something she fully understood. "As long as the products meet corporate standards, we're supposed to integrate them into regular operations." That morning, while driving home through Federal Hill, I passed a billboard advertising Royal Farms' original recipe chicken with the slogan, "Taste that takes you home." The advertisement featured a smiling family gathered around a dinner table, sharing a meal that looked identical to the phantom dishes I'd found on our warming racks. But the family in the photograph looked wrong somehow. Their smiles too wide, their eyes too bright, their positioning around the table slightly off, like actors who'd been directed to portray happiness without understanding what genuine contentment looked like. I pulled into a parking space near Cross Street Market and called Anthony Ricci, the district manager who'd hired me. His voicemail picked up immediately, delivering a recorded message about being busy with operational improvements and promising to return calls within 48 hours. When I got back to my apartment, I found myself researching the history of our Royal Farms location online. The building had housed various businesses over the decades, a family restaurant called Kowalski's Kitchen in the 1980s, a carry-out place called Eddie's from 1990 to 2003, then a brief stint as a check-cashing store before Royal Farms took over the lease in 2008. Kowalski's Kitchen. Tommy's last name was Kowalski. I spent the rest of the day wondering if the previous manager had been more connected to the building's history than I'd realized, and whether rules he'd left behind were meant to protect employees from something that had been cooking in that kitchen long before Royal Farms moved in. I spent Wednesday afternoon at the Enoch Pratt Central Library on Cathedral Street, researching everything I could find about Kowalski's kitchen. The microfiche archives held newspaper clippings from the Baltimore Sun dating back to 1983, when the restaurant first opened under the ownership of Stefan and Anna Kowalski, Polish immigrants who'd settled in East Baltimore after World War II. The early reviews were glowing. Food critic articles praised the authentic European flavors and recipes passed down through generations. One 1985 piece described the fried chicken as transcendent, somehow familiar, yet completely unique, like tasting a childhood memory you'd forgotten you had. The restaurant became a neighborhood institution, drawing customers from across the city who claimed the food reminded them of dishes their grandmothers used to make. But the later clippings told a different story. In 1987, Stefan Kowalski died suddenly of a heart attack while working in the kitchen during evening rush. Anna continued operating the restaurant alone, but customers began complaining about changes in the food quality. A 1988 review mentioned erratic service and meals that tasted wrong, like someone trying to recreate a recipe from incomplete memory. The final newspaper mention appeared in early 1989. Kowalski's kitchen closes amid health department investigation. The article was brief, mentioning concerns about food preparation practices and sanitation violations, but provided no specific details about what investigators had discovered. I photocopied everything and drove back to Eastern Avenue, arriving early for my shift. Maria was training a New Day employee, a college kid named Justin Park, who looked like he'd rather be studying for midterms than learning how to operate a roller grill. "This is Dante," Maria said, introducing me. "He's been handling our overnight operations, doing a good job keeping the kitchen running smoothly." Justin nodded politely, but I caught him glancing toward the kitchen with a puzzled expression. "Is someone back there cooking? I keep hearing sounds, but Maria said the fryers get shut down at 10. Maria and I exchanged looks. She'd been working here for 3 years, without acknowledging the phantom kitchen sounds. But now a new employee was picking up on them within his first hour. "Old building," Maria said quickly. "Pipes and ventilation make noise. You'll get used to it." After she left with Justin, I spent the early evening shift thinking about the Kowalski family connection. Tommy's note hadn't mentioned anything about his possible relationship to the restaurant's original owners, but the coincidence felt too significant to ignore. Maybe the rules weren't just random observations. Maybe they were family knowledge, passed down from someone who understood what had been left behind in this kitchen. That night brought my first encounter with a customer asking specifically for the phantom chicken. Around midnight, a man in his 40s entered wearing a Baltimore Ravens jacket and work boots covered in concrete dust. He approached the counter without looking at the menu or pricing displays. "I heard you serve the old recipes," he said, his voice carrying the accent of someone who'd grown up in South Baltimore. "My buddy Dennis told me to ask for the special chicken. Said it tastes like his grandmother used to make at the old Polish place." Following Rule 2, I served him a 3-piece meal from the warming rack without asking questions. He paid with cash and sat near the window, eating slowly and closing his eyes between bites. Halfway through his meal, he pulled out his phone and made a call. "Ma, you were right," he said softly. "It tastes exactly like Babsia's chicken. I don't know how they got the recipe, but it's perfect." When he finished eating, he approached the counter again with the same question I'd heard before. "Could I speak to the cook?" "Kitchen's closed for the night," I replied, following the script. He nodded, gathered his trash, and left a $5 tip on the counter. "Tell whoever's back there that the Novak family remembers," he said before walking out. After he left, I found myself staring at the warming racks, trying to understand how Phantom Chicken could recreate specific family recipes for customers who'd never provided any information about their grandmother's cooking. The pieces looked identical to standard Royal Farms chicken, but somehow each customer experienced flavors connected to their personal history. The phone call came at 2:53 a.m., 3 rings that echoed through the empty store. I answered following the established routine. "Royal Farms, Baltimore." This time, instead of silence, I heard what sounded like kitchen activity. Pots clanging, oil sizzling, voices speaking in what might have been Polish. The sounds were distant but clear, like listening to a radio broadcast from another decade. "Royal Farms, Baltimore." The kitchen sounds grew louder, and I began to distinguish individual voices. An older woman giving instructions, younger voices responding with, "Yes, babcia," and "I understand." The conversation was in Polish, but somehow I caught fragments, discussions about seasoning proportions, cooking temperatures, timing. "Royal Farms, Baltimore." The line went dead, but the kitchen sounds continued through the phone's silence. I hung up, but the phantom cooking noises from behind the swinging doors seemed to intensify, as if the phone call had somehow amplified whatever was happening in there. For the first time since starting this job, I felt compelled to violate one of Tommy's rules. The urge to push through the kitchen doors and confront whatever was producing these sounds grew stronger with each passing minute. My legs carried me halfway across the store before I caught myself, remembering Rule 1. Never acknowledge the kitchen sounds after 2 a.m. I forced myself to return to the counter, but the sounds continued for another hour. Multiple people working, preparing what sounded like enough food to serve a full restaurant. Pots boiling, knives chopping, timers ringing. Conversations in Polish, punctuated by laughter and the gentle corrections of an experienced cook teaching younger hands. When silence finally returned around 4 a.m., I checked the warming racks to find and spread even more elaborate than Tuesday night. Chicken, pierogi, kielbasa, bigos, plaki ziemniaczane. A complete Polish feast that filled the entire food service area. Everything steamed like it had just finished cooking, and the aromas transported me back to childhood visits to my grandmother's friend Mrs. Kowalski in Fells Point. Though I hadn't thought about those visits in over a decade. The delivery truck arrived right on schedule, but this time I was ready. I positioned myself in the back office where I could observe through the window without being seen. The driver looked older than I'd initially thought, perhaps 60, with graying hair visible beneath his cap. He moved with the careful precision of someone who'd been making this same delivery for years, unloading cases of ingredients that matched the mysterious spices from earlier in the week. But tonight, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. As he stacked the final case on the loading dock, he paused and looked directly at the office window where I was standing. Despite the tinted glass and darkness, his gaze met mine with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where to look. He raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or acknowledgement, then climbed back into his truck and drove away. The entire exchange lasted only seconds, but I felt like I'd been caught observing something I wasn't supposed to see. When I checked the delivery after sunrise, I found something new among the usual spices and cooking ingredients. A handwritten recipe card written in Polish, with Babcia's kurczak at the top, and detailed instructions below. The handwriting looked old-fashioned, done with a fountain pen on cardstock that had yellowed with age. Maria arrived to find me standing in the storage room, holding the recipe card and trying to make sense of what was happening in our kitchen every night. Family recipes, she said, glancing at the card without showing surprise. Corporate's been working with heritage food consultants to develop more authentic flavors. Customers respond well to nostalgia-based marketing. But her explanation felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script she didn't fully understand. And when I looked closely at the recipe card, I noticed something that made my hands shake. The signature at the bottom read, Anna Kowalski, 1987. The same year Stefan had died, and the same year those quarters in the navy coat woman's palm had been minted. I called in sick Thursday morning and drove to Greenmount Cemetery, where the Enoch Pratt librarian had told me most of East Baltimore's Polish families were buried. The groundskeeper, an elderly man named Walsh, who'd been working there since the 1970s, helped me locate the Kowalski family plot near the back section, close to where Bel Air Road meets North Avenue. Stefan Kowalski's headstone was simple granite with dates showing he'd lived from 1925 to 1987. Next to it, Anna Kowalski's marker indicated she died in 1991, just 2 years after the restaurant closed. But what caught my attention was a third headstone, smaller, newer, bearing the name Thomas Stefan Kowalski, with dates from 1965 to this year. Tommy had died recently, within the last 3 months, according to the fresh earth and plastic flowers someone had left at the grave. The dates meant he would have been Stefan and Anna's grandson, old enough to remember working in the restaurant kitchen before his grandfather's death. I stood there for 20 minutes, trying to piece together why Tommy would have left rules for managing supernatural activity in a building his family had once owned. The note in the register drawer wasn't just observations from a previous employee. It was family knowledge, passed down from someone who understood what his grandmother had left behind. A groundskeeper noticed me studying the headstones. "You knew Tommy?" he asked, adjusting his cap against the October wind. "Worked with him," I said. "Didn't know he'd passed. Car accident on a 95 about 2 months ago. Shame. He used to visit his grandparents every week. Always brought flowers for his babshia. Said she taught him everything about cooking, that she was still teaching him, even after she was gone." The man walked away, leaving me staring at fresh dirt that marked the end of the Kowalski family line. Tommy had been the last one who understood what was happening in that kitchen, and now I was alone with 7 rules and a phantom cook who'd been preparing meals for over 30 years. Thursday night, I arrived at work with a different perspective. This wasn't just a job managing overnight shifts at a gas station. I was caretaking something that had been important to a family that no longer existed. The phantom cooking wasn't a haunting in the traditional sense. It was Anna Kowalski continuing the work she'd started with her husband, preparing food that connected customers to memories of family meals they'd shared decades earlier. The evening shift passed quietly until 10:30, when a woman in her 70s entered wearing a winter coat despite the mild weather. She moved slowly, using a walker, and approached the counter with the careful steps of someone who'd been coming here for years. "Is Stefan working tonight?" she asked, her voice carrying a thick Polish accent. Stefan had been dead for over 30 years, but this woman was asking about him like he might be in the kitchen preparing tonight's dinner. "Stefan's not here," I said carefully. Her face fell with disappointment that seemed genuine. "Anna told me he was cooking again. She called me yesterday, said the old recipes were back, that he was in the kitchen like before." I didn't know how to respond. Anna Kowalski had been dead since 1991, but this woman was describing a recent phone conversation. Following the spirit of Tommy's rules, I decided not to challenge what she was telling me. "Would you like some chicken?" I asked. "It's made with the old recipes." Her expression brightened. "Oh yes, Stefan's chicken. 3 pieces, extra seasoning, just like when my husband was alive." I served her from the warming rack, charging the standard price. She paid with bills that looked crisp despite their apparent age, then sat at the table nearest to the kitchen. As she ate, tears rolled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "It tastes exactly right," she said between bites. Stefan always knew how much paprika I liked, how to get the crust perfect. Anna was lucky to marry such a good cook. When she finished eating, she gathered her trash and approached the counter again, but instead of asking to speak to the cook, she had a different request. "Could you tell Stefan that Helena Novak sends her regards, and that his chicken still makes me think of Sunday dinners in the old neighborhood?" After she left, I found myself wondering how many customers over the years had come seeking food that connected them to people they'd lost. The phantom cooking wasn't just about maintaining recipes. It was about preserving relationships, keeping alive the memory of community meals that had shaped an entire generation of East Baltimore families. The storage room humming started around 11 p.m., earlier than usual and with different characteristics. Instead of the lullaby-like melody I'd heard before, tonight's humming had the rhythm of work songs, the kind of tunes people sing while kneading dough or chopping vegetables. Multiple voices joined in, creating harmonies that suggested several people working together in cramped kitchen space. I waited in the office, following Rule 4, but found myself listening more carefully to the patterns in the humming. The melodies were repetitive but comforting, like the background sounds of a busy family kitchen during holiday preparations. Occasionally, I heard what sounded like gentle laughter or quiet conversation between songs. The humming continued for 45 minutes, longer than any previous episode. When silence returned, I waited the usual 10 minutes before entering the storage room for supplies. But tonight, the room had changed in a way that made my stomach twist. The temperature was warmer, as always, but the air held scents I hadn't noticed before. Yeast from rising bread, herbs being dried, the lingering warmth of an oven that had been baking all day. More disturbing were the physical changes: muddy footprints on the concrete floor, flour dusted on the metal shelving, wet spots where someone had been washing dishes. Evidence of people working in a room that should have been empty. I examined the footprints more closely. They were small, about the size a woman in her 60s might wear, with the distinctive tread pattern of old-fashioned work shoes. The flour on the shelves had been disturbed in specific patterns, like someone had been reaching for ingredients stored on high shelves. But when I checked the security camera monitor in the office, the storage room appeared empty on the screen. The timestamp showed continuous recording, but the video revealed no activity. Just empty shelves and concrete floors that looked exactly as they should. The disconnect between what I was seeing in person and what the cameras recorded made me question my own perception. Either the surveillance equipment was malfunctioning, or whatever was happening in that storage room existed outside normal visual recording. Friday night brought the burning snow again, but this time I was ready. When the acrid odor began drifting through the store around 2:45 a.m., I followed Rule 7 immediately, locked the front door, and retreated to the office. But instead of just waiting for sunrise, I decided to monitor the security cameras to see if they would capture whatever was causing the smell. The screens showed empty store aisles, dark parking lot, normal views of all areas except the kitchen. That camera had been displaying static for the past week, which I'd assumed was a technical problem. But tonight, through the static, I began to see shapes moving. Vague outlines of people working, shadows shifting against stainless steel surfaces. The burning smell grew stronger, but now I could identify it more precisely. Not electrical fire or melting plastic. Cooking oil heated far beyond safe temperatures. Metal pans left too long on gas burners. The acrid smoke of food burning while cooks worked frantically to keep up with orders. Through the static-filled kitchen camera, I watched shadows moving with increasing urgency. The shapes seemed to be struggling with something, reaching for controls, trying to manage equipment that wasn't responding properly. The burning smell intensified until my eyes watered, but the shadows continued working, apparently unaware that their cooking was producing dangerous smoke. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices calling for help, muffled by distance and static but clearly audible. A woman's voice shouting in Polish, younger voices responding with panic, the sound of someone choking on smoke. I realized I was watching the night Stefan Kowalski died. The kitchen camera was somehow showing the events from 1987, playing out the emergency that had killed Anna's husband and changed everything for their family. The burning smell wasn't coming from current equipment problems. It was the residual smoke from a kitchen fire that had happened over 30 years ago, preserved in this building like a traumatic memory that refused to fade. The voices from the kitchen grew more desperate, calling for Stefan, calling for help, calling for someone to shut off the gas lines. Through the static, I saw shadows converging around one central figure, then scattering as smoke filled the screen completely. The smell reached its peak around 4 a.m., then began to dissipate as the shadows on the security monitor faded back into pure static. By sunrise, the air had cleared completely, but I spent the rest of my shift thinking about Anna Kowalski, continuing to cook in a kitchen where her husband had died, trying to maintain their restaurant's reputation while processing grief that had never fully healed. When Maria arrived Friday morning, she found me sitting in the office, staring at security monitors that showed nothing but empty rooms and normal store operations. "Everything all right last night?" she asked, noticing my exhausted expression. "Just the usual," I said, though nothing about this job felt usual anymore. She checked the warming racks and found the typical spread of phantom food: chicken, sides, desserts that had materialized during the overnight hours. But today, she paused while examining the chicken pieces. "This seasoning blend is perfect," she said, holding up a piece that looked golden and crispy. "Whoever's been handling the cooking has really figured out the old European techniques. Corporate's going to be pleased with these quality improvements." As she spoke, I noticed something that made my hands shake. Flour fingerprints on the warning rack handles, exactly the same size as the footprints I'd found in the storage room. Saturday afternoon, I drove to the Baltimore County Records Office in Towson, hoping to find more information about the Kowalski family and their restaurant. The clerk, a middle-aged woman named Patricia, who'd been working there since the 1990s, helped me locate business licenses, health department reports, and property transfer documents. What I discovered made the phantom cooking feel less mysterious and more tragic. Kowalski's kitchen had been struggling financially even before Stefan's death. The 1987 health department investigation hadn't been triggered by customer complaints. It had been initiated after Stefan's fatal heart attack, when inspectors found evidence that Anna had been working alone in the kitchen for weeks, trying to maintain full restaurant operations without adequate help. The health violations weren't about sanitation or food safety. They were about a grieving widow, pushing herself beyond human limits, cooking 16 hours a day to keep her husband's legacy alive, while dealing with insurance companies, creditors, and customers who expected the same quality meals they'd been enjoying for years. Anna had been hospitalized twice for exhaustion during the restaurant's final months. The health department's recommendation to close wasn't punitive. It was an intervention to prevent her from literally working herself to death in the same kitchen where her husband had collapsed. I photocopied everything and drove back to Eastern Avenue, arriving early for my Saturday night shift. Maria was training Justin on the register system, but he kept glancing toward the kitchen with the same puzzled expression from earlier in the week. "There's definitely someone back there," he whispered when Maria stepped away to help a customer. "I can hear them talking, moving around." But when I asked Maria about kitchen staff schedules, she said food preparation happens during day shifts. I wanted to explain about Tommy's rules, about the phantom cooking and customers who came seeking recipes from a restaurant that had closed over 30 years ago. But Justin was a college kid who probably just needed gas money and study time, not someone who should be dragged into whatever Anna Kowalski had left behind. "Night shifts can be weird," I said instead. "Old buildings make sounds that seem like activity." After Maria and Justin left, I spent the evening thinking about Anna's final months, working alone in that kitchen, cooking for customers who expected miracles, trying to maintain something that had become too big for one person to handle. The phantom cooking made sense now. She'd never really stopped working. Death had just freed her from the physical limitations that had been killing her. Sunday night brought a customer I hadn't seen before. A man in his 80s wearing a suit that looked expensive, despite being decades out of style. He walked with a cane, but moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to respect. When he approached the counter, he spoke with the authority of someone making a reservation at an exclusive restaurant. "I'd like to speak with Anna," he said, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd immigrated as a child. "Please tell her that Walter Kowalski is here." My stomach dropped. Walter Kowalski, potentially Stefan's brother or cousin, someone who'd known the family personally. He was asking to speak with a woman who'd been dead for over 30 years, but his tone suggested he expected this request to be honored. "Anna's not available right now," I said, following the spirit of the rules about not questioning customer requests. "Then I'll wait," he said, taking a seat at the table nearest the kitchen. "I have an appointment." He sat there for 2 hours, occasionally checking a pocket watch and adjusting his coat. Around midnight, the kitchen's sound started, earlier than usual, and with different characteristics. Instead of the normal cooking preparation, I heard what sounded like conversation. 2 voices, one older woman and one older man, speaking in Polish with the easy familiarity of people who'd known each other for decades. Walter's expression changed when the voices began. He smiled for the first time since entering, nodding like he was hearing exactly what he'd expected. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, too quiet for me to distinguish words, but clearly an exchange between people who cared about each other. When the voices stopped, Walter stood and approached the counter again. "Please tell Anna that the family business is in good hands," he said, placing a $20 bill on the counter despite not ordering anything. "And that Stefan would be proud of what she's accomplished here." He left without explanation, walking slowly across Eastern Avenue toward a black sedan that hadn't been in the parking lot when he arrived. By the time I processed what had happened, both Walter and the car had disappeared. The Tuesday woman returned exactly on schedule, but this time she wasn't alone. A younger woman accompanied her, maybe 30 years old, with similar features and the same careful way of moving. They approached the fountain drink machine together, the older woman filling her usual large Diet Coke, while the younger woman chose Sprite. When they placed their coins on the counter, I noticed both sets were from 1987. The older woman's familiar quarters and the younger woman's dimes, all bearing the same unusual warmth and patina. $1, I said, calculating 50 cents for the older woman and 50 cents for her companion. The younger woman looked surprised. I thought large drinks cost more than 50 cents. "Special pricing," I said, following what felt like an extension of Rule 3. They sat together at the window table, the older woman explaining something in quiet tones, while the younger woman listened with the attention of someone learning important family history. Their conversation was mostly inaudible, but I caught fragments, mentions of recipes, instructions about timing, warnings about following specific procedures. Before leaving, the older woman approached the counter alone. "My granddaughter will be taking over my Tuesday visits," she said, her voice carrying more emotion than I'd heard before. "Please treat her with the same consideration you've shown me." After they left, I found myself wondering how many generations of the same family had been making weekly pilgrimages to this location, maintaining some kind of connection to whatever Anna Kowalski had preserved in this kitchen. The phone call that night came at exactly 3 a.m., but this time it wasn't just kitchen sounds. Through the receiver, I heard Anna's voice clearly, speaking in English, addressing someone she called "dear boy" with the affectionate tone of a grandmother talking to a favorite grandchild. "Royal Farms, Baltimore," I said, following the protocol. "The recipes need to be preserved," Anna's voice continued, apparently not responding to my greeting. "Someone needs to understand what we've built here, what it means to the families who remember. Royal Farms, Baltimore. Tommy tried to teach you through his note, but notes aren't enough. You need to see the kitchen, to understand how the cooking works, to learn why the rules matter. Royal Farms, Baltimore." The line went dead, but Anna's words stayed with me. For the first time since finding Tommy's note, someone had directly addressed me, acknowledged my presence, and suggested that following the rules wasn't enough, that I needed to actively participate in whatever was happening here. Wednesday night, the storage room humming took on an urgent quality that made my skin crawl. Instead of the usual work songs, the melody sounded like a summons, repetitive, insistent, growing louder when I tried to ignore it. The humming continued for over an hour, building to an intensity that seemed to vibrate through the walls. When silence finally returned, I violated Rule 4 for the first time. I opened the storage room door and stepped inside. The room had been transformed. Instead of concrete floors and metal shelving, I found myself standing in a kitchen from the 1980s. Tile floors, gas ranges, prep tables worn smooth by decades of use. The air smelled like rising bread and simmering stock, with underlying notes of paprika and caraway that reminded me of my grandmother's spice cabinet. Anna Kowalski stood at the central prep table, exactly as she might have looked in 1987. Dark hair streaked with gray, wearing an apron over a simple dress, her hands covered in flour from rolling dough. She looked up when I entered, her expression showing no surprise at my presence. "You're Stefan's replacement," she said, her voice carrying the same accent I'd heard through the phone. "Tommy said you'd eventually need to see the real kitchen." I tried to respond, but words wouldn't come. The storage room existed simultaneously as a modern commercial space and as Anna's restaurant kitchen, both realities occupying the same physical location. "The rules keep us separated from your world," Anna explained, kneading dough with practiced motions. "But sometimes separation isn't enough. Sometimes the living need to understand what the dead have preserved." She gestured toward the prep tables, where I could see ingredients that matched the mysterious deliveries, spices in unmarked containers, rendered fat in metal cans, vegetables that looked fresh despite being prepared by hands that had been still for over 30 years. "Every meal we serve connects someone to family they've lost," Anna continued. "Helena Novak tastes her husband's favorite chicken. The Kowalski cousins remember Sunday dinners from childhood. These recipes don't just feed hunger. They feed memory, love, the connections that death tries to break." As she spoke, I began to understand why Tommy had left those rules. They weren't just instructions for managing supernatural activity. They were protocols for maintaining the sacred space, a kitchen where love transcended death and meals became acts of remembrance. "But the work is getting harder," Anna said, her expression growing serious. "Fewer people remember the old neighborhood, the families who made this place important. Without living witnesses, the memories start to fade, and the recipes lose their power." She stopped kneading and looked directly at me. "I need someone who can help bridge the gap between what was and what is. Tommy was the last family member who understood, but now there's only you." Standing in Anna's kitchen felt like stepping through a doorway between decades. The phantom prep tables held ingredients that didn't exist in 2024. Vegetables with varieties I didn't recognize. Spices in containers marked with handwritten Polish labels. Cuts of meat that looked like they'd been butchered according to old-world techniques. Everything carried the warmth of active cooking, but nothing cast shadows under the fluorescent lights that hummed overhead. "I don't understand how I can help," I said, finding my voice finally. "I'm not a cook. I don't know your recipes or your family's history." Anna smiled, wiping flour from her hands with a kitchen towel that looked solid despite her translucent appearance. "Cooking isn't about recipes, dear boy. It's about intention, about putting love into food that feeds more than just the body." Stefan understood this. Tommy learned it before he died. "Now it's your turn." She gestured toward a notebook lying open on the prep table. Pages filled with handwritten recipes in English and Polish, detailed instructions for seasoning blends, timing notes for different cuts of meat. But as I looked closer, I realized the handwriting was changing. New entries appearing as Anna spoke. "The recipes write themselves when someone cares enough to preserve them," she explained. "But they need a living person to anchor them in the present. Someone who can bridge the gap between memory and reality."
Thank you, brother. Ozzy,
I reached toward the notebook,
I'll take that.
but my hand passed through it like touching smoke. "I can't even hold it."
Can't have come and go if it's just a bunch of ladies.
"Not yet," Anna said. "First, you need to understand what you're accepting. This isn't just about following Tommy's rules anymore.
Who owns the building?
This is about becoming the caretaker of something much larger."
I got the cereal.
The kitchen around us shifted, walls expanding to show the full restaurant as it had existed in 1987. Tables filled with families sharing Sunday dinner, children laughing over plates of pierogi, older couples holding hands while eating chicken that reminded them of their own grandmother's cooking. The scene played out like a living photograph, showing me what Kowalski's kitchen had meant to the East Baltimore community. Every meal we served carried forward traditions that families had brought from the old country, Anna said, her voice growing stronger as the phantom restaurant came to life around us. When we closed, those connections started to break. Children grew up without tasting their grandparents' recipes. Families forgot the foods that had defined their heritage for generations. The restaurant scene faded, replaced by the modern Royal Farms layout. But Anna's kitchen remained superimposed over the commercial space, two realities occupying the same location. The phantom cooking isn't about nostalgia, Anna continued. It's about preservation. Every customer who tastes our food connects to family members they've lost, traditions they've forgotten, love that death tried to erase. We're not just serving meals, we're serving memory itself. She moved toward the stove, where multiple pots simmered with contents I couldn't identify. But maintaining this connection requires energy, intention, someone alive who understands the importance of what we're preserving. Tommy provided that bridge for 3 months, but when he died, the connection began to weaken. I thought about the customers I'd served, how in the Novak crying over chicken that tasted like her husband's favorite, the Ravens fan calling his mother to describe flavors that matched his grandmother's cooking. Walter Kowalski, having conversations with family members he couldn't see, but clearly loved. "What happens if I say no?" I asked. Anna's expression grew sad. "The phantom cooking will fade gradually. The customers will stop coming. The memories will break apart like old photographs, and another piece of Baltimore's cultural heritage will disappear forever. And if I say yes, you become the living anchor that keeps these connections strong. You learn to see both realities, the modern gas station and the restaurant underneath. You help us serve food that feeds souls as well as bodies." She paused, studying my face. "But once you accept this responsibility, you can't simply walk away. The connections become part of you. Tommy discovered that when he tried to quit." A cold realization hit me. Tommy didn't quit because he was scared of the supernatural activity. He quit because he couldn't leave. He tried to move back to Pennsylvania, but the restaurant called him home every Tuesday. He'd drive 6 hours from Pittsburgh just to check on the kitchen to make sure we were still cooking. The accident happened during one of those trips. Anna's words explained Tommy's final weeks. The weird behavior Maria had mentioned, the talks about sounds and customers that didn't make sense. He'd been trying to break free from a responsibility that had become too heavy to carry, but the Phantom restaurant wouldn't let him go. "I'm asking you to make an informed choice," Anna said. "Understand what you're accepting before you decide. This isn't just a job. It's a calling that will change how you see the world." Before I could respond, the kitchen lights flickered, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Anna's expression shifted to concern, then alarm. "Someone's breaking the rules," she said, moving quickly toward the prep area. Multiple violations happening simultaneously. Through the kitchen's phantom windows, I could see the modern Royal Farms customer area. Justin, the college kid Maria had been training, was wandering through the store after hours, apparently having let himself in with a key. He was systematically violating every rule Tommy had written. He'd brought friends, 3 other college students who were treating the place like a private party. One was trying to operate the fryers despite the kitchen being closed. Another was attempting to call 911 on the landline, laughing about prank calling the police from a haunted gas station. The third was in the storage room, banging on the walls and shouting, "Hello, ghosts." "They think this is a joke," Anna said, her voice carrying edge of panic I hadn't heard before. "They don't understand what they're disrupting." The phantom kitchen began to flicker like a television with poor reception. Anna's form started to fade, becoming more translucent with each rule violation happening in the customer area. "The rules aren't just guidelines," she explained, her voice growing fainter. "They're protective barriers that keep our realities separated. When multiple rules get broken simultaneously, the barriers collapse." I watched Justin and his friends through the kitchen window, documenting their ghost hunt with their phones, completely unaware that their actions were causing actual harm to something precious and irreplaceable. "I have to stop them," I said, moving toward the storage room door. "Wait," Anna called, her form now barely visible. "If you enter the customer area while the barriers are down, you'll be caught between realities. You could end up like us, unable to fully exist in either world." But I was already opening the door, stepping from the phantom kitchen into the modern storage room, where Justin's friend was still banging on walls and shouting. The transition hit me like walking into a freezer. The storage room existed in both timelines simultaneously. I could see modern shelving and concrete floors, but also the tile and crepe tables from Anna's kitchen. Justin's friend looked right through me, apparently unable to see my presence. I walked through the store, watching Justin and his friends continue their violations while existing partially outside normal reality. I could see them clearly, but when I tried to speak, My voice produced no sound they could hear. When I reached for Justin's shoulder, my hand passed through him like touching mist. The phantom cooking customers began arriving, despite the barriers being down. Helena Novak entered, moving slowly with her walker, apparently unaware that college students were filming her with their phones. The Tuesday woman's granddaughter came next, looking confused by the crowd, but approaching the fountain drink machine as if nothing had changed. But these customers were different now. More translucent, less solid, fading in and out like poor radio reception. The barrier collapse was affecting everyone connected to Anna's kitchen, pulling them into the same uncertain existence between life and death. Justin's friend in the storage room found Anna's recipe notebook, somehow now solid enough to handle. He was flipping through pages while his friends filmed, reading Polish instructions aloud in mocking accents. That's when I realized what I had to do. I focused on Anna's words about intention, about putting love into preservation, rather than just following rules. Instead of trying to stop the violations through force, I needed to strengthen the barriers through understanding. I walked to the counter and began serving the phantom customers, acknowledging their presence even though I couldn't fully interact with the college students. I gave Helena her chicken, charged the Tuesday granddaughter 50 cents for her fountain drink, treated each customer with the respect and care Anna had been providing for over 30 years. As I served each person, the barriers began to stabilize. The phantom customers became more solid. Anna's kitchen grew stronger, and the college students gradually lost interest as their equipment stopped detecting supernatural activity. By the time Justin and his friends left, laughing about their boring ghost hunt, I understood that I'd made my choice. I was the bridge Anna needed, the living person who could maintain the connections between past and present, memory and reality, love and loss. The recipe notebook writes itself now, pages filling with new entries whenever a customer shares a memory about food their family used to make. Last Tuesday, a man from Little Italy described his great-aunt's meatballs, and by Thursday morning, Anna had perfected the recipe. The phantom kitchen has expanded beyond Polish dishes, Italian, Greek, Jewish, whatever Baltimore families need to remember about the people they've lost. I can touch the notebook now, read Anna's handwriting as she documents each family's culinary history. My hands work alongside hers during the overnight cooking sessions, learning techniques that died with the immigrants who brought them to America. She teaches me to season by memory rather than measurement, to cook with intention that transforms simple ingredients into vessels for love. The Tuesday woman's granddaughter brought her own daughter last week, a girl maybe 8 years old, who paid for her small fountain drink with a quarter from 1987. The coins seemed to multiply somehow, passed down through generations like family heirlooms that never lose their value. The little girl asked if she could speak to her great-great-grandmother, and Anna spent 20 minutes at the counter, having a conversation only the child could hear. Maria retired without ever acknowledging the phantom cooking, replaced by a district manager who reviews our food sales numbers and praises our heritage menu innovations without asking who developed the recipes. Corporate has started advertising our authentic ethnic specialties and traditional family recipes, apparently believing their marketing department deserves credit for meals prepared by dead immigrants who refuse to let their culture disappear. Anthony Ricci visits monthly now, always commenting on our exceptional customer satisfaction scores and asking about our secret to creating such emotionally resonant dining experiences. I serve him coffee and let him assume the success comes from Royal Farms' corporate training programs, rather than from ghosts who cook with love that transcends death. The building's lease expires next year, and Anthony keeps mentioning plans to modernize the location, maybe expand into the space where Eddie's Carryout used to operate. He doesn't understand that Anna's kitchen exists outside normal property boundaries, that her connection to this place runs deeper than legal documents or renovation permits. But I've started keeping my own notebook, documenting everything Anna teaches me about preserving memory through food, about maintaining connections between the living and the dead. When the time comes to move this operation, and Anna assures me the time will come, I'll be ready to help her rebuild the phantom kitchen somewhere new. Stefan appears sometimes during the overnight shifts, working alongside Anna like they used to before his heart attack. He doesn't speak to me directly, but I catch him nodding approval when I properly season the chicken or time the fryers correctly. Their partnership continues across death, bound together by shared purpose rather than separated by tragedy. I called my sister Keisha in Atlanta last week, told her I'd finally found work that mattered, that I was helping preserve something important for families who needed to remember. She didn't ask for details, but she understood the change in my voice, the sense of purpose that had been missing since my discharge. The rules still matter, but now I understand they're not restrictions. They're protocols for sacred work, guidelines for maintaining a space where love persists beyond life. Every customer who tastes Anna's cooking connects to family members they've lost, traditions they've forgotten, heritage they need to preserve. Tonight, a woman in her 40s will enter asking for her grandmother's brisket recipe. Anna already has the ingredients prepared, the phantom kitchen ready to recreate flavors from a Brooklyn delicatessen that closed in 1963. We'll serve memory disguised as a meal, love preserved in seasoning, family history that feeds the soul as much as the body. The gas station closes at midnight, but the restaurant never stops serving.
Wolfie said demon. Demon of the wolf.